राकेश, वहां से मलबा हटा दो.
Padma, I'm so fed up. These laborers are always on leave and we still haven't finished the gazebo.
দিব্যা শ্রমিককে একটু জল দিয়ে দাও তো, আজকে বড্ড গরম।
Macha, I heard the metro construction is facing problems because the workers migrated back home. Can you believe it?
Hello and welcome to L is for Labour, your source of information for all things labour. This series takes you through the world of work in India. Today, we're going to talk about construction work. Now, if you're anything like me, the words construction work probably conjure in your mind workers standing on the scaffoldings of tall buildings or carrying heavy bricks at a construction site. We see these workers every day, whether it is when we're hopping on a Mumbai local to go to work or finishing a long day and going back by an auto in Chennai. But in reality, the nature of construction work is far more diverse than we actually think. My own conceptualization of construction work began to expand in the true style of modern times after I watched a mini-series in 2010. The name of this mini-series was The Pillars of the Earth. Now, The Pillars of the Earth is a TV mini-series premised on a novel by the author Ken Follett of the same name. It is a compelling work of fiction set in 12th century England, which is dark and conflict-ridden and involves various parties vying with each other for the throne. In the meanwhile, England constantly teeters on the brink of war. In the story, a number of primary characters harbor a strong desire to build a cathedral. Now, while The Pillars of the Earth is clearly a commentary on England during medieval times, it also reflects the profound complexities of the construction industry back then. At this site of the cathedral that the key characters want to build, a whole host of jobs are described. Some of these include carpenters and masons, blacksmiths and quarrymen, and of course, laborers. Thankfully, we no longer live in medieval times, with a whole host of evolutions ranging from electricity to modern medicine now gracing our world. So, let us teleport back from medieval times to present-day India and ask ourselves, what does the world of construction look like for workers? Now, the construction sector in India is our second largest employer after agriculture. The industry employs a whopping 71 million workers of different types, and these workers are exceedingly diverse. Just as a random point of comparison, the entire population of France, which is the second most populous European nation, is 68 million. According to official figures, men comprise as much as 90% of the construction sector workforce across the country. Furthermore, men tend to be more concentrated in the types of jobs that we call skilled or semi-skilled relative to their female counterparts. And finally, when it comes to urban areas, a sizable portion of the construction workforce is often comprised of migrant workers, who can comprise up to 30 to 40% of the urban area construction sector workforce. When analyzed at a state level, what we see is that workers often tend to move from northern and eastern states to other parts of the country where construction work is concentrated. So this includes workers moving from states such as Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, West Bengal and Orissa to other places like Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, Delhi and Maharashtra. Now, a lens I often use to understand the lives of construction workers in India is by understanding who exactly has access to our surroundings. So, for example, do people who are worse off socioeconomically have the same access to our surroundings and built environment than their affluent counterparts? One of my favorite poems of all time dates back to the 18th century by an anonymous poet. The first verse goes as follows: "The law locks up the man or woman who steals the goose from off the common, but leaves the greater villain loose, who steals the common from off the goose." This famous poem links to what was called the enclosure movement, which occurred between the 16th and 19th century in England. The entire debate surrounded what was called the commons, or common lands which were used by peasants and poorer families for agricultural and community purposes. All of a sudden, via what was called the Enclosure Acts, these common lands were suddenly converted to private property by the process of fencing them off or erecting walls and enclosing them. Consequently, the livelihoods of farmers, peasants, and the rural poor were entirely devastated as they depended on these common lands for subsistence. Several rural families also faced displacement during this time. Now, this is a very interesting lens via which we can look at policy questions pertaining to equity in the built environment. In 1990, the political scientist Elinor Ostrom argued that the commons could actually be governed via self-governance and community-based rules. In other words, what we call the commons or common lands don't necessarily have to always be privatized as the answer. The above example shows clearly that there are various layers of complexity surrounding who can access a space. Now, this prompts various questions when it comes to construction workers in India. For one, who exactly are our construction workers? Secondly, do the same construction workers who build from the ground up our villages and cities have access to these spaces and the built environment? And finally, what are the general exclusions that these workers tend to face?
And nearly 71 million workers are employed in the construction and related sectors. And of this, over 90% workers are engaged in informal settings that are largely, when I say informal setting, that means these are characterized by lack of clear-cut employer-employee relationship. Often the workers do not have any employment contracts or ID cards, and they have to, confront issues such as no or inadequate social protection, poor OHS provisions. We can talk about it because this also could be, this results in accidents and injuries. And when you talk of, composition of the construction workforce, women are largely in the unskilled categories. They work as cleaners, helpers, head loaders.
Now let's have a look at the various axes via which we can analyze work in the construction sector. I largely look at this via three axes, the first being mobility, the second gender, and the third skills. With mobility, we ask the question, are the construction workers migrant construction workers or resident construction workers from the same place? With gender, we look at whether construction workers are predominantly men or women. And finally, when it comes to skills, we ask the question of what types of skills different construction workers have. The data tends to categorize this as unskilled, semi-skilled, skilled, and highly skilled. However, there is a caveat. Civil society has sometimes pushed back on this idea and framing because it raises the question of how exactly we valorize labor, meaning what exactly does it mean for someone to be unskilled?
So I think the first group that lives in the city faces problems like any other group of low skilled informal workers. So they have they don't have enough income to afford proper housing, so they may be living in a slum or even in a more degraded settlement than what we would think of as a slum, in the sense that it's literally a cluster. They may be pavement dwellers, they may be the homeless who are using government shelters, they may be moving in and out of the city, going back to the village, coming for short periods of work. So they face a lot of problems because their life is quite disorganized, and the main thing is that work availability is not consistent. So they may be standing at the labor chalk and only getting work for 10 days or 15 days, and at the best maybe 21, 22 days a month. So this is a very hand to mouth kind of a scenario in which they have to also support a family. The other sort of construction worker is the migrant construction worker, and it's really, there's a very, very strong interlinkage between migration and construction. And what's happening here is that their main residence is in rural India, and they are then moving into the construction site to work for 7-8 months a year, or for a year, for whatever duration the site is, or their work is required, and then they go back into agricultural wage work for a bit, and then do another stint of construction work.
Now let's have a look at the second axis we discussed: gender.
Both gender, caste are very important angles here. It's very clear from the data that there is an overrepresentation of SC and ST, so scheduled caste and scheduled tribe populations, in this interstate migrant workforce that is in construction. So they are doing wage labor because they're usually landless or have very, very unusable or very small parcels of land. So they are usually laboring in the agricultural space, and they're laboring in the construction space is the mix. And gender really matters in this situation because of the living conditions and the kind of, wherever there are women, young children are coming with them. And if women are working a full day on a construction site, then childcare becomes an issue, breastfeeding becomes an issue. There's toilets where women require privacy, they require a different level of infrastructure.
And the final axis of analysis we look at is skill type. Now, there are different types of construction workers at every site, and the types of construction workers tend to vary in line with the exact nature of the project and its stage of completion. As per the data, construction workers can essentially be grouped into categories such as unskilled. This includes workers such as cleaners and laborers. Then you have the semi-skilled category, which includes workers such as carpenters, plumbers, and electricians. Then you have the skilled categories, which typically includes workers such as architects, engineers, and welders. And finally, you have the highly skilled category of workers, and this typically includes safety officers, other office workers, and the like. Now, one of the big things we haven't yet discussed is the exposure of workers to the environment, especially when employed in certain types of jobs. See, for example, what this construction worker has to say about working at a construction site in South Delhi.
मैं निर्माण श्रमिक हूँ। हाल के वर्षों में मौसम के बदलाव से हमारी व सभी निर्माण मजदूरों की मुश्किलें बढ़ गई हैं। अधिक गर्मी या अब आप देख सकते हैं कि प्रदूषण के कारण हमारा काम रोक दिया जाता है। इससे हमें अधिक आर्थिक चोट पहुंच रही है। गर्मी में इस वर्ष सबसे अधिक गर्म लू और तापमान 50 डिग्री तक पहुंच गया था। गर्मी से बचाव के लिए श्रमिकों के लिए पर्याप्त साधन नहीं होने से कार्य बहुत जोखिमपूर्ण हो जाता है और काम रुकने से, चाहे वो अधिक गर्मी की वजह से हो या प्रदूषण की वजह से, उसकी मार तो मजदूरों को झेलनी पड़ती है। सरकार को इस पर गंभीरता से विचार करना चाहिए। मजदूर तो मजदूरी ही कर सकता है, पर मजदूर और उसके रोजगार को सुरक्षित रखने की जिम्मेदारी सरकार की है।
Now, let's have a look at the legal and policy frameworks, as well as what we can do in practice to improve the lives of construction workers.
That in year 1996, the government of India enacted the Building and Other Construction Workers Act 1996 that came into effect from 1st March 96. And then related legislation was the Building and Other Construction Workers Welfare Cess Act 1996. So depending on the state, because as you know, labor also falls within the concurrent list of the constitution, which means both central and state government could legislate. So this cess collection varies between it could be one bit that varies between 1 to 2% of the construction cost. And now each state has established State Building and Other Construction Workers Welfare Board, which we call it BOCW, that provides range of benefits to the registered workers, and this could include accident insurance, medical assistance, education, housing, pension. See, I would also like to mention, because the board is a very unique legislation, because it does not put any financial burden on the government as such. We are trying to, we are trying to make it replicable in other countries in South Asia. Last year, I was also involved in it. We had a meeting with the Labour Minister of Sri Lanka, and he was very impressed with the model. And this was, immediately the ministry, started working on it to prepare a cabinet note, because this appealed to the government that you can cater to the needs of the workers, as well as there is no budgetary allocation that's required from the government, because it's a self-generating fund.
So there are various things that we can do at the level of the government, companies, and as informed consumers to ensure that construction workers lead enhanced lives. Some examples include: number 1, ensuring that more workers are registered under the BOCW, or the Building and Other Construction Workers Act, part of which includes ensuring that they also have ID cards, which at the moment is a bit of a complicated issue. The second would be ensuring that companies abide by national laws, and also ensuring that companies abide by standards such as the ILO, or the International Labour Organization's Occupational Safety and Health Standards. And finally, as informed consumers, just as we are doing here, we should keep informing ourselves on the lives of construction workers. And when engaging in the world of construction, such as buying a house, ensuring that developers are ethical both on the environmental and labor fronts. There is also more that we can do institutionally at the intersection of climate and worker issues.
Buildings contribute a high level of CO2 emissions. They contribute about 35 to 40%. So buildings construction are central to this transition. And we as BWI have also been in dialogue with the Green Building Councils. This Green Building Council is also gaining ground in India as well. Now, number of buildings are getting certified. Last year, we signed in Tamil Nadu an MOU with the Green Building Council. And we also had discussion with them that please include labor standards also when you are certifying buildings, include labor standards also.
I shall sign off with a quote from the famous scholar and civil rights advocate W.E.B. Du Bois. The laborer is the one who shapes the world in which we live. It is his hand that turns the soil and builds the cities and creates the wealth that all men use.
The migration story.